بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I welcome you all to this series of ours in which we are going through Matn Abi Shujaa, which, as you know, is a primer in the Shafi'i madhab, and it is usually the first book or the second book that is studied by the students of Shafi'i fiqh. And this is our second lesson, and in this lesson we will start or begin or commence the reading of the first book, the first chapter from this book, which is Tahara. Tahara. In the previous session, we went through the introduction, which was written by the author himself, Al-Qadi Abu Shujaa. And through that introduction, we got to understand fiqh and the meaning of fiqh, and madhab and what is meant by madhab. And we also got to know what the author's intention was behind the writing of this Matn, this Matn Mubarak, this blessed text. Now the author says, Tahara, the book of purification, or the book of Tahara. Tahara, the ulama of lughah, the scholars of language, when they say Tahara, or when the Arabs generally use the word Tahara in everyday usage, they mean النظافة والخلوص من الأدناس الحسية والمعنوية. So Tahara linguistically means نظافة, cleanliness, والخلوص, and to get rid of أدناس, impurities, حسية, physical impurities, أو معنوية, assumed non-physical impurities. This is the linguistic meaning of Tahara, and we can sum it up in one word: cleanliness. Cleanliness of all sorts, it is included in Tahara lughatan, in terms of its meaning. Now, istilahan, when the fuqaha, the scholars of fiqh, when they use the word Tahara, what do they mean? They mean something a bit more specific. And there's always a connection between the lughawi usage and the istilahi usage of terms. So the fuqaha, when they use the word Tahara, they mean رفع الحدث وإزالة النجس أو ما في معناهما أو على صورتهما. Now, so let's break this ta'rif down. رفع الحدث, to lift off hadath, to remove hadath. What does hadath mean? Hadath refers to assumed non-physical impurities that stop one from praying salah. That's hadath. You might be clean, you might have just taken a shower. When the time for dhuhr comes and you want to pray, can you pray just by the virtue of the fact that you had a shower, a regular shower? No. Why? Because you are in the state of hadath. There is an assumed impurity on you which will be removed once you do wudu. Once you do wudu, this assumed non-physical impurity will be removed from you, and then it will be allowed for you to pray the salah. So when the ulama, when the fuqaha, they define hadath, they define it as أمر اعتباري يقوم بالأعضاء يمنع من صحة الصلاة حيث لا مرخص. So أمر اعتباري, this is, they're defining hadath, and they're saying it's أمر اعتباري. It is a matter that is assumed. It's an assumed impurity. You don't have any physical impurity on you, but it is an assumed impurity. يقوم بالأعضاء, it is on your body parts. يمنع من صحة الصلاة, it stops the salah from being valid. حيث لا مرخص, when no rukhsah or no excuse is there. So hadath is an assumed impurity on you. You might be physically pure. There's nothing, there are no physical impurities on you, on your body. But you haven't done wudu, right? Similarly, if you're in the state of janaba, you might have gone and washed yourself. So there's no physical impurity on you. But you are still muhdith. This assumed impurity is a part of you until you do ghusl. Similar to the state of someone who was in a state of janaba, and he went in and he took a shower without the intention of doing ghusl al-janaba. Without the intention of doing the ghusl that is meant for janaba, he just went in to take a regular shower. This person comes out. He will not have any physical impurity on him, but he will still be in a state of hadath, because hadath is an assumed impurity. So the fuqaha, when the translators translated, they translate it as ritual impurity, a ritual religious impurity that is on you, that will be removed once you do wudu if you're not in a state of janaba, or once you do ghusl al-janaba if you were in a state of janaba. And unless you do wudu, or unless you do the ghusl al-janaba, this will stop your salah from being valid. حيث لا مرخص, they add a clause in the definition, the fuqaha, they say حيث لا مرخص, when there is no rukhsah, when there is no excuse. What do they mean by this? The fuqaha, they look at the masail from all angles, and they also assume masail that could possibly happen. So if this mas'ala happens, you know what to do about it, you know the hukum. So when the fuqaha define hadath, and they say that this is an assumed impurity which stops your salah from being valid, someone can ask them, Shaykh, what if I'm stuck in a place, I don't have wudu, and there's no water, and there's no turab to do tayammum? What do I do then? And the time of salah it's going by fast. Should I pray, or should I wait till I get water, or till I can find turab, and then pray after the time of the salah has gone? So the Shafi'i fuqaha, they say, no, you will pray. Why? What is their daleel? Their daleel is that the time of salah needs to be respected. إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. The ayah of the Noble Quran. Salah, the time of the salah, it needs to be respected. Therefore, if you do not have water, and you do not have turab to do tayammum, and you don't have wudu, and there's no way for you to get water or turab, and the time of the salah is going, the Shafi'i fuqaha will say you should pray at that time to respect the timing of the salah. And then once you find water or turab to do tayammum, you're going to make wudu or you're going to do tayammum and you're going to repeat your salah. Because for the salah to be valid, its shurut must be present. Its conditions must be present. And one of the conditions of the salah is, or for the validity of salah is, wudu. طيب. So this is the first part of Tahara, raf'ul hadath, the removal of hadath. Then the fuqaha say, wa izalatun najas. Tahara is raf'ul hadath, and Tahara is also izalatun najas, removal of najas. Najas, as we said, are physical impurities. Physical impurities. Now in lugha, najas means kullu mustaqdar, everything that is repulsive and dirty. That's najas lughatan, linguistically. But istilahan, what do the fuqaha mean when they say najas? They mean something a bit more specific. They say kullu mustaqdar يمنع من صحة الصلاة حيث لا مرخص. They say every physical impurity, everything that is repulsive, dirty, every physical impurity that stops the salah from being valid, حيث لا مرخص, when there is no excuse. Now the Shafi'i fuqaha, they add this clause that najis is that physical impurity which stops your salah from being valid. So we ask or every repulsive thing, everything that the human nature finds repulsive, which stops you from or which stops the salah from being valid. So we ask the Shafi'i fuqaha, are there some things that are repulsive to human nature that if they are on you, your salah is still valid? The Shafi'i fuqaha will say yes. There are some exceptions. There's an exception is semen. Semen in the Shafi'i madhab is considered pure. Semen in the Shafi'i madhab is considered pure. Why? Because of the hadith that is present in Sahih Muslim. The meaning of the hadith is that Aisha radiyallahu anha, al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiyallahu anha, she would scrape off the semen from the clothes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wear those clothes and pray salah in them. So the Shafi'i fuqaha, they argue, they say that if semen was impure, scraping it off would not have been enough. Aisha radiallahu anha would have washed it, because when semen is scraped off, its effect is still left on the clothes. So they use this hadith as a dalil that semen is pure. So what does that mean? That means if someone was in a state of janaba, they went and they did ghuslul janaba. So this person is pure now, but he comes out and he wears the same clothes on which there was semen, and then he prays salah in it. Is this salah valid or invalid? According to the Shafi'iyah, his salah is valid. His salah is valid. Why? Because semen is pure. Even though the human nature finds it repulsive, it is a mustaqdar. But it's a mustaqdar that does not, or a mustaqdar which does not stop your salah from being valid. Your salah is still valid. So najas is every mustaqdar, every repulsive thing, every physical repulsive thing which stops your salah from being valid, حيث لا مرخص, when there is no excuse. So they add this clause here as well, because you might have a situation where someone is stuck somewhere and they have wudu, but their clothes have some sort of an impurity on them, maybe some splashes of urine on their clothes. And this person has no other clothes, and there's no water, and there's no way for him to purify his clothes. And the time of salah is going by. So his clothes are dirty. Technically, if you have other clothes, or if you can wash, if you had the option to wash these clothes, your salah would be invalid if you prayed in these impure clothes. But in his case, he doesn't have those options. He doesn't have water, he doesn't have any other material using which he could purify his clothes, and he has no other clothes. But he has wudu. So will we say pray in those clothes because najis is still on them? Or will we say don't pray? The Shafi'i fuqaha, they say you'll pray because the time of the salah needs to be respected. However, you will repeat your salah again. You will repeat your salah again. Once you find water, you purify yourself and you purify your clothes and then you repeat your salah. So hadath is an assumed non-physical impurity, and najis is a physical impurity. It's a physical impurity. And for your salah to be valid, tahara necessitates that you are free from both ritual, assumed non-physical impurity, and you are also free from physical impurities. Your body should be free from them. The place you're going to pray in, that needs to be pure as well. The clothes that you're wearing, they need to be pure as well. So the definition of tahara is رفع الحدث وإزالة النجس أو ما في معناهما. طيب, there's another clause that the fuqaha have added, أو ما في معناهما, or that which is included in their meaning, or meaning that which is included in the meaning of رفع الحدث and إزالة النجس. What do they mean by this? Well, the Shafi'i fuqaha, they'll say that imagine you have gone in to do wudu. What is wajib upon you is to wash everything one time. That's wajib. So imagine you have taken water in your hands and you splash it on your face the first time. When you did this the first time, hadath has been removed. Hadath has been removed. The second and third time are sunnah. Hadath is removed from the first time, or from the first splash, or from the first washing. But the second and third time are sunnah. If you don't do them, your wudu is still valid. If you wash your face only once in wudu, your wudu is still going to be valid. The second and third time are just sunan. So the Shafi'i fuqaha, they said, well, is this not a part of tahara, the second and third time? Are they not part of tahara? Because we said tahara is raf'ul hadath and izalatul najis. Here, in the second and third time, raf'ul hadath is not happening. The second and third time you wash your face, or the second and third time of washing any of the other parts of wudu, raf'ul hadath is not happening. Raf'ul hadath happened the first time. So is this not included in tahara? They said it is included in tahara because it is something that is included in the overall meaning. أو ما في معناهما. Now, so this is the complete definition of tahara. رفع الحدث وإزالة النجس أو ما في معناهما. Now, and we have taken the definitions of hadath and the definitions of najis. And we've taken the definitions of najis as well. After that, the author, after saying Kitab al-Tahara, the author says, فصل أنواع المياه وأقسامه. فصل, so that's a subheading, or a chapter break. فصل أنواع المياه, types of water. وأقسامها, and categories of water. Types and categories of water. Then he says, المياه التي يجوز بها التطهير سبع مياه. He says, there are 7 types of water that can be used to purify oneself. There are 7 types of water that can be used to purify oneself. Now, what are they? So he says, number 1, ماء السماء, the water that descends from the sky. What is meant by that is rain. Some fuqaha call it ماء المطر, rainwater. What is our evidence that this water can be used for purification? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the noble Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا. Naam. That's the evidence. Then he says, the author says, مَاءُ الْبَحْرِ, sea water. مَاءُ الْبَحْرِ, sea water. What is our evidence that sea water can be used to purify oneself? And just to clarify, when we say to purify oneself, we mean to be able to make wudu from it, to do ghusl janaba, and to purify yourself. Now, that is what is meant by that. So ma'ul bahr, sea water. What is our evidence that this water can be used to purify oneself? The hadith in Sunan at-Tirmidhi, when a group of sailors came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they asked him about sea water, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Huwa at-tahuru ma'uh, al-hillu maytatuh." So this hadith is evidence, أو كما قال الصلاة والسلام. This hadith is evidence for the fact that sea water is pure and it can be used for purification. Then the author says, ma'un nahar, river water, water from rivers. Naam, ma'un nahar. What is evidence that this water can be used to purify oneself? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ibrahim, وَسَخَّرَ لَكُمُ الْأَنْهَارِ. This ayah is evidence that river water from the rivers can be used to purify oneself. Now, then the author says, مَاءُ الْبِئْرِ, water obtained from wells. Water obtained from wells. What is our evidence that the water that is obtained from wells can be used to purify oneself? The hadith of Sunan Abi Dawood, in which the Prophet ﷺ was asked about Bi'ru Buda'ah, the well of Buda'ah. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ طَهُورٌ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٌ. So this is evidence that water obtained from wells can be used to purify oneself. Then the author says, مَاءُ الْعَيْنِ, مَاءُ الْعَيْنِ, water that is obtained from springs. The evidence for that is the ayah in Surah Al-Zumur, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَسَلَكَهُ يَنَابِيعَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. So this is evidence that spring water can be used to purify oneself as well. And then the author says, مَاءُ الثَّلْجِ وَمَاءُ الْبَرَدِ, water that falls from the sky in solid form, snow. What is meant by that is snow. So if you collect snow and it melts, the water that is obtained from it can be used to purify oneself. What is our evidence? The hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, in which the Prophet ﷺ made the dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma aghsil khatayaya bil ma'i wal thalji wal barad. So these are the 7 types of water which can be used to purify oneself. Now, then the author goes on and says, وَالْمِيَاهُ عَلَى أَرْبَعَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. He says water is of 4 types. Water is of 4 types. طاهر مطهر غير مكروه. وهو الماء المطلق. He says the first type of water is Tahir. Tahir meaning it is pure in itself. Mutahhir, it can be used to purify others. غير مكروه, it is not makruh. Tahir, mutahhir, غير مكروه, وهو الماء المطلق, and that is الماء المطلق. الماء المطلق, and we'll come to the definitions in a few moments. Then he said وطاهر مطهر مكروه. The second type of water is it's pure in itself. Mutahhir, it can also purify others. It can be used for purification. Makruh, but it is makruh. And then he says وهو الماء المشمس, and that is the water which has been exposed to the heat of the sun under some conditions. Now, then he says the third type of water وطاهر غير مطهر وهو الماء المستعمل والمتغير بما خالطه من الطاهرات. So he says the second type of water is water that is pure in itself, طاهر غير مطهر. However, it cannot purify others. It cannot be used for purification. وهو الماء المستعمل, and that is used water with some conditions. والمتغير بما خالطه من الطاهرات, and that water which has been changed by the addition of pure substances. That water which has been changed by the addition of pure substances. And we will come to the explanation of these in a minute. And then he says the fourth type is وَمَاءٌ نَجِسٌ, impure water. Impure water. وهو ما حلت فيه نجاسة وهو دون القلتين أو كان قلتين فتغير. He says impure water is that which, or is that water in which, or is that water which was less than قلتين, less than 160 liters, and some impure substance was added to it. This is the first type of impure water. And the second type is if the water was قلتين, 160 liters or more, and an impure substance was added to it and it changed one of the characteristics of water. And inshallah ta'ala we'll explain all of these in a minute. And then he says والقلتان, قلتان are 500 رطل بغدادي تقريبا على الأصح. He says قلتان are 500 رطل بغدادي. This was a unit of measurement in his day, the author's day, or the author's days. And قلتان, there's a difference of opinion on them because the author himself says تقريبا, almost, approximately. في الأصح, on what is more correct. So there has always been a difference of opinion on what constitutes قلتان and what doesn't, or what is the minimum limit of قلتان. But the modern day scholars of fiqh, they say it's around 160 liters, and some say it's a bit more, and there's ikhtilaf on the issue. We're going by the opinion that it's 160 liters, and Allah knows best. Now, to understand this better, I'm going to recategorize the types of water so that it will be easy for us to have a mental mind map of this chapter. The author says the water is 4 types, but we'll say that the water is of 3 types. Water is of 3 main types. Number 1 is water which is called Tahoor. Tahoor, ay Tahirun Mutahhir. Tahoor water is pure in itself and it can be used for purification. So Tahoor water is what the author calls Tahirun Mutahhir. Water that is pure in itself and can purify others. It can be used for purification. We're going to call it Ma'un Tahoor, pure water. Water that is pure in itself and it can also purify others. Now this Tahoor water, this is what the fuqaha call al-ma'ul mutlaq. Al-ma'ul mutlaq. What is meant by al-ma'ul mutlaq? The fuqaha, they define ma'ul mutlaq as ما يقع عليه اسم الماء بلا قيد لازم. They say ma'ul mutlaq is that which is called water without the addition of a necessary clause. What do they mean by that? Let me just repeat one more time. Ma'ul mutlaq is that which is called water without the addition of a necessary clause. Qaid lazim. What do the fuqaha mean by this? Imagine a scenario where someone says to me, please bring me a bucket of water. And I go to the sea or to the river or to the well, and I take some water in the bucket and I take it back to him. Remember, he said, bring me water. He did not say anything else. He said, bring me water. So I went to the sea or the well or the river and I took some water in the bucket and I took it to him. Will this person have any objection? No, because I brought him water. Well, someone might say, no, in the first case you brought him sea water. I'll say, yes, it is sea water. But this is not a qaid lazim. This is not a necessary clause. To add sea to water that has been obtained from the sea, this is not a necessary clause. If I take out the water from the sea, I can call it just water, and people will understand that this is just water. So this is what the fuqaha call qaydun munfak, an unnecessary clause. Unnecessary clause, or a clause that can be separated. Because it's not wajib for me to say, if I obtained water from the sea, it's not obligatory for me to say, and I mean obligatory urfan, for the people to understand. It's not obligatory for me to say, hey, this is seawater. If I say it's water, I will be telling the truth. If I say this is water, even if I obtain it from the sea or the well or the river, and I say this is just water, I will be speaking the truth, because that is just water. Now imagine another scenario where someone said to me, bring me some water. And I go and I bring him a glass of rose water. Will this person be satisfied with what I have brought him? No. He will say, you have not brought me water, you have brought me rose water. So here, this rose water, it's a specific type of water which has a qaid lazim to it, a necessary clause to it, and a necessary clause is the word rose. If I have rose water in a glass, I can't call it just water. I will always have to call it rose water to be truthful, because rose water is not just water. So the word rose here, it's a qaid lazim, it's a necessary clause. Right? So, and the reason why I'm explaining it in this way is so that you understand the terminology used by the fuqaha. Otherwise, we could have just translated it as ma'ul mutlaq, as something which can be called just water. But it's very important to understand the terminology that the fuqaha use. So they say, ما يقع عليه اسم الماء بلا قيد لازم. Something that is called water without having a necessary clause attached to it. And the example that we took was that if I take water from the sea, I can call it just water. So the qaid here, the clause here, it's not lazim, it's munfak, it can be separated. I can call sea water just water. I don't have to say sea water. But with rose water, I have to add the clause rose. I have to say it's rose water. I can't just call it water. So here the qaid is qaid lazim. So rose water cannot be considered just water. And therefore it cannot be used for purification, because it is not ma'un mutlaq, even though it's a substance that is pure in and of itself, but it cannot be used because it's not just water, it's rose water. So that is what the fuqaha mean by al-ma'ul mutlaq. Now ma'ul mutlaq includes the 7 types of water that we discussed: sea water, water from the river, water from wells, water obtained from springs, and so on and so forth. All of those are types of al-ma' al-mutlaq. All of those are types of al-ma' al-mutlaq. So all the 7 types of water are included in when we say the word al-ma'ul mutlaq. There's another definition that the fuqaha give of ma'ul mutlaq. It's similar, different wording. They say al-ma' al-baqi ala khilqatih. Water that remains as how it was originally created, in its original form, right? So al-ma' al-baqi ala asli khilqatih or ala khilqatih. Water that remains in its original form, right? That is another way they define al-ma'ul mutlaq. Naam. Now, ma'ul mutlaq is of 3 types. It's of 3 overall types. Al-ma'ul mutlaq غير مكروه, or as the author says, Tahir, Mutahhir, غير مكروه. Water that is pure in and of itself, it can purify you, and it is not makruh. And those are the 7 types of water that we discussed. Water from the sea, water that's obtained from rain, from snow, and so on and so forth. Then there's a type of water that is Tahoor. It's Tahir, Mutahhir. Again, remember these terms. The term Tahoor is equal to the term al-ma'ul mutlaq, and it is equal to the term Tahir, Mutahhir. These are all synonyms. So if I use them interchangeably, don't get confused. These are all synonyms. Tahoor, Tahir, Mutahhir, and al-ma'ul mutlaq. Right? And all of these 3 terms mean water that is pure in and of itself, and it can be used to purify others, it can be used to make wudu and to do ghusl and so on and so forth. It can be used for ibadah, it can be used for a'ada as well. It can be used for daily activities like cooking and cleaning itself and all of that as well. And it can be used for ibadah as well, such as doing wudu and doing ghusl and so on and so forth. Now this type of water, it's of 3 types. غير makruh, a type which is not makruh. And those are the 7 types of water that we discussed. And then there's the second type is makruh. Water that is considered makruh, discouraged to use. And the Shafi'iyah, they believe that there are certain types of water that are makruh. You can still use them to purify yourself, but to use them would be doing an act that is makruh. What are those types? The first type, and the one which the author mentioned, is al-ma'ul mushammas. Water that has been exposed to the sun under certain conditions. Which conditions? The Shafi'iyah, they add a few conditions. Right? And we'll discuss the evidence for this in a moment. What are the conditions that the Shafi'iyah add? They say, number 1, the water that has been exposed to the sun, this needs to happen in a country with a hot climate, like the Hijaz, Saudi, a lot of the Khalij, for example. These are countries which have a hot climate, because they say that if a country does not have a hot climate, it has, it's a country with a cold climate, then and you put water outside and it gets heated under the sun, it's not makruh. Why? Because for it to cause harm, the expected illness, or the illness that there's a slight chance of happening, it would happen if the water was put out under the sun in a country with a hot climate. That's the first condition. Condition number 2 is that the water needs to be put outside under the sun at a time when it's hot, such as the time after Dhuhr, when the sun is at its peak. That's a time when it's hot. So that means that even if someone was in Saudi and they took water outside at night time, and or not night time, but after Asr, when it's not a very hot time, and they put the water outside and it got a bit hot because of the sun, the Shafi'iyya don't say that's makruh. Why? Because the second condition is that the water got exposed to the sun when the timing was hot, or when the sun is at its peak, or the time of the day which is considered to be a time where or the time of the day when it's considered to be really hot. Now, the third condition they add is that the water should have been, or it must, for it to be makruh, it must have been in a metal container. In a metal container, ina muntabi', a vessel which can be welded, right? And those are metal containers, right? So that's the third shart that they mention. The fourth shart that they mention is that it's makruh if it is used while it was hot. If the first three shurut are there, that someone in Saudi, in a country with a hot climate, put the water out after dhuhr when it was hot outside in a metal container, but then he brought it in and he let it cool off and then he used it, the Shafi'iyya say it's not makruh. Why? Because then he will not be affected by the illness, right? Because he let it cool off. The fifth condition that they mention is that it is makruh if you use the water while it's hot on your body. If you use it to wash your clothes, for example, then it's not makruh. And number 6, they say, if there is a particular smell that is coming out of it, they call it zuhuma. It's a smell that comes off of water that has been put in a metal container at a time when it's really hot, outside, exposed to the sunlight. So if this zuhuma, if the smell is not coming out and you use it, then the Shafi'iyya do not consider it to be makruh. So these are the 6 conditions that the Shafi'iyya mention for ma'ul mushammas to be makruh. If any one of the conditions is not there, then it's not considered makruh. Now, what is the dalil for ma'ul mushammas to be considered makruh? Imam al-Muzani, the student of Imam al-Shafi'i, rahmatullahi alayhi, in his Mukhtasar, he mentions the statement of Imam al-Shafi'i in this regard. Imam al-Shafi'i, he mentioned that the only reason why he thinks that ma'ul mushammas is makruh is because of medical reasons, and because of the athar of Umar that has come from Umar radiyallahu anhu. And since the main reason why Ash-Shafi'i considered it makruh was medical reason, not a shar'i reason. And there's a difference between the two. There's a difference between a medical karaha and a shar'i karaha. Shar'i karaha means that if you do this thing that is makruh, if you abstain from this thing that is makruh, you're going to get rewarded for it. But medical karaha means that this is not shar'i karaha. Thawab and iqab, punishment and reward, are not connected to it anymore. It's a medical karaha. Someone might say, well, what if this thing is going to harm you? Shouldn't you not do it at all? Well, the reason why the Shafi'iyya said Imam Shafi'i said it's makruh is because there's a very, very slight chance, according to the medicine that they had at that time, that if you use water that has been exposed to the sun with all these conditions, that you'll get some sort of an illness. There's a very slight chance, not a high risk, and not even a yaqini chance, right? Or not even a yaqini matter that you will definitely get that illness, or there's a high chance you'll get that illness. They thought there was a very slight chance. That's why they said it's makruh. Otherwise they would have said it's haram to use, because something that harms you directly, it will be haram. It wouldn't be makruh. And since the reasons were based on the medicine of that time, we can use the medicine that is present today to overrule that. Why? Because the original hukum was given based on, the original ruling was given based on medical reasons, not because of a shar'i text, not because of an ayah from the Quran or the hadith. If the ruling was deduced from an ayah of the Quran or a hadith, then we couldn't overrule it based on modern medical findings, because then that's a karaha shar'iyya. It's makruh because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it's makruh, or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said it's makruh. No amount of scientific or medical evidence could have led to us saying that this is or could lead to us having changed that ruling. Whereas at that point it would have been a shar'i hukum. But this was a medical karahiyya, so we can use modern medicine to overrule that. And the reality is, to be honest, we don't even have to do that. Centuries ago, Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah, he did that. He's from the A'immah Kibar of the Shafi'iyya. Imam An-Nawawi. Imam An-Nawawi mentioned that Ma'ul Mushammas is not makruh because every hadith that has been related to give that meaning, or that has been relayed to give that meaning, those hadith are weak. So Imam al-Shafi'i, he does not consider Ma'ul Mushammas to be makruh, and that is the opinion that we take. But we still need to recognize that the mu'tamad, the main opinion in the Shafi'i madhab, is that Ma'ul Mushammas is considered makruh. And this, even though we do not believe in the karahiyya of it, it still gives us a very important principle. That the rule that the Shafi'iyya used to give Ma'ul Mushammas the ruling of being makruh, the principle that they used was that if something has a slight chance of harming you, very slight chance, it is to be considered makruh. And so now we can use that principle and look at things around us in our day and age, and we can once we have reached that stage of doing ijtihad, we can give a hukum with regards to those things. And based on this, our Shaykh Labib Najib al-Adani, he says, his fatwa is that it is makruh to use water that has been put in a plastic container, and this plastic container has been exposed to sunlight for a long time, because medical research has proven that this type of water can lead to illnesses. Yeah? So these rules, they help us deduce general principles which we can use, dawabit, which we can use to derive new rulings. Now, so this is the second type of water that is Tahoor, Tahir, Mutahhir, al-Ma'ul Mutlaq, which the Shafi'iyya consider makruh. And there are other types of water that the Shafi'iyya consider makruh, such as water that is Shadidul Burudah, water that is really, really cold, and water that is Shadidul Harara, water that is really, really hot. Why? Because it's mustahab that when you wash yourself, you wash yourself a bit extravagantly. You do some mubalagha in it. It's mustahab, right? That you wash yourself properly and you do some mubalagha in that. But when the water is really cold or really, really hot, you'll only do the very bare minimum, and because it's difficult to use that water, which is very hot or very cold. So you'll do the bare minimum in that case, while doing wudu and so on and so forth. So that's why the Shafi'i, they said this type of water is makruh. However, if you have nothing else present apart from that water, then you have to use that. You have to use that. Now, and so the Shafi'i also mentioned that Ma'ul Mushammas, or water that is really hot or really cold, if you have only that type of water and the time for salah is running out, then it is wajib upon you to use that type of water. Even though they consider it to be makruh in usual circumstances, in this specific circumstance, they'll say that it is wajib. Now, the third type of water that is tahoor, it's pure in itself, it can be used to purify you as well, is water that is haram. It's haram to use. And that is water that has been stolen. Al-ma' al-maghsoob, water that has been stolen. It's haram to use, because even though it has the property of purifying you, it is still it's haram to use because you have stolen it. So this is the first type of water that is tahoor, pure in itself, it can purify you, and it is divided into three types: ghayru makruh, makruh, and haram. طيب, and now we move on to the second type of water. The second type of water, and that is tahir ghayru mutahhir. Tahir ghayru mutahhir, water that is pure in itself, but it cannot be used to purify others. It cannot be used to make wudu or for you to do ghusl, right? Even though this water might be okay for drinking, it will be okay to use for washing clothes or cooking, right? But it's not, it can, because it's pure in and of itself, but it cannot be used, to make wudu or to do ghuslul janaba. طيب. This water is of two types. Number one, what they call al-ma'ul musta'mal, water that is used with certain conditions. Now, what is meant by water that is used under certain conditions? So the first condition that the Shafi'iyya add is that water uzila bihil mani'. Uzila bihil mani'. It was used to remove a mani' from you. What is meant by mani'? Imagine the time for Dhuhr has come, and now you want to pray, but you don't have wudu. Can you pray without wudu? No. Why? Because not having wudu is a mani'. The hadath, this assumed non-physical impurity on you, this is a mani'. It's an obstacle between you. It's an obstacle that stops you from praying until you go and do wudu. Once you do wudu, this mani' will have been removed. This obstacle will have been removed. Now, or in the case of someone who has wudu, but he has splashes of urine on his clothes, najis on him. Can he pray? No. This najis, these impure, physical impurity, these splashes of urine on him, these are mani'. They are obstacles stopping him from praying. Until he purifies his clothes, he cannot pray. Once he purifies his clothes, now he can pray. Right? So, water, uzila bihil mani', water that was used to remove a mani' from yourself, such as water that was used for wudu, water that was used to cleanse a najis off you, water that was used in a ghuslul janaba, right, and so on and so forth. This type of water, it cannot be used again. Someone who went in, they made wudu, and the used water was left, it was collected in the sink or in a bucket. Can they reuse that water? The Shafi'iyya say no. And we'll come to the dalail in a moment, inshallah ta'ala. We'll come to the evidences in a moment, inshallah ta'ala. First, we want to understand the conditions very well. Now, because these conditions are used to put ahkam on further scenarios. And so here, after the Shafi'iyya mentioned this condition, they're going to give you scenarios. So they'll say, for example, there is a father, there's a person who made wudu, a mukallaf, someone who's he's a Muslim, aqil, baligh, salah is obligatory upon him. He goes, he makes wudu, and from his wudu water, there's used water that trickled down and it collected in a bucket. Can he use this water again? No, they'll say no, he can't use this water again. So this person who's a mukallaf, he prayed, he's a mukallaf, he's a aqil, baligh, Muslim, and salah is obligatory upon him. He goes, he makes wudu, and this water, it trickles down and gets collected in a bucket. This is used water. Can it be used again for another wudu, a second time? The Shafi'iyya say no, it cannot be used. Well, someone might say, well, what if my son, who is not baligh yet, he's not a mukallaf, he's ghair mukallaf, because he's not baligh, salah is not obligatory upon him. What if I help him to make wudu and water trickles down from him, from his used water trickles down from him and gets collected in a bucket? Can this water be used again? The Shafi'iyya will say no. Why? Because even if he is ghair mukallaf, for him to be able to pray, for this kid to be able to pray, for this child to be able to pray, he has to do wudu. So with his wudu, a mani' has been removed. The mani' that was between this child, and salah. Because for him to be able to perform salah, he needs to do wudu. So the hukum is the same regardless of whether the person is mukallaf or ghair mukallaf. Okay, someone might bring another scenario. They say, well, take the example of a Hanafi. The Ahnaf, they don't believe that niyyah is obligatory in making wudu. They don't believe that niyyah is obligatory. The Shafi'iyya say it's obligatory, that when you step into to make wudu, your intention should be that you want to make wudu. Your intention should be that you want to make wudu. For the Shafi'iyya, it's obligatory. For the Hanafi, it's not obligatory. So this Hanafi, he will make his wudu without the intention. He'll wash himself and he'll consider it wudu. According to the Shafi'iyya, his wudu is not valid. So according to the Shafi'iyya, a mani' has not been removed. The mani' has not been removed. This is the first condition. For water to be considered used water, a mani' has to be removed through it. Right? In this case, because we don't consider this wudu to be valid, his mani' has not been removed. But according to his madhab, the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa, the mani' has been removed and he's allowed to pray. His prayer will be valid. So are we going to rule based on our madhab or based on the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa in this case? Are we going to say that this Hanafi person, let's say he has a Shafi'i roommate, and this Hanafi person, he washed himself without the intention to do wudu, and now he's considering it wudu. There was some water, that his used water got collected in a bucket. Can this Shafi'i student use this water? We will tell the Shafi'i student, no, you can't. Because here we will not rule based on our madhab, we will rule based on his madhab. In his madhab, his wudu is valid. And in his madhab, the mani' has been removed. So we will consider that the mani' was removed. We'll consider it this way, that the mani' has been removed. And this water is used water, and the Shafi'i student cannot use it. Right? And no one can use it in general, right? Because it's considered used water now. Okay, someone might bring up another scenario. They'll say, well, you have the case of a man who has married a Christian. It's allowed to marry Christians if they're, pure and modest and, muhsanat from Ahl Kitab. It's allowed to marry them. So this man, he married a Christian lady, and she's not a Muslim. She's not a Muslim. She went through her monthly cycle, menstruation, and this Muslim person, her husband, he knows that he cannot be intimate with her until she goes and takes the ghusl, until she purifies herself. But this lady, she's going to go inside, she's going to take the ghusl. However, her ghusl is not going to be considered ibadah. So what about the water that she uses and it gets collected in a bucket or somewhere? Can that be used again? We will say no. Because even in this case, a mani' was removed. People will ask, which mani' was removed? We said the mani' that was stopping her husband from being intimate with her Islamically. Islamically, there's a mani'. There's a mani' between a husband and a wife. When the wife has gone through her menses, the husband cannot approach her intimately. By approaching intimately, I mean intercourse. The husband cannot have intercourse with her until she has purified herself. So even in the case of a kafira, even though her action is not considered ibadah, a mani' was removed. And this mani' was that there was an obstacle stopping her husband from being intimate with her from an Islamic perspective. So when she took ghusl, that mani' was removed. So the water that was used by her, it got collected in a place, it cannot be used again. So you see how, based on this one condition that you've deduced, and we will come to the dalil for this in a moment, inshallah ta'ala. Because of this condition, there are so many scenarios that have come, and we were able to mention the rulings on them. Now let's look at some other scenarios. What if someone already has, they did wudu for dhuhr, and the time for asr came, they still have wudu, but just to perform a sunnah, they go in and they make wudu again. This person, the water that he used, and it got collected in a place, can this water be used again? The Shafi'iyya will say yes, it can be used again. This water is not considered used water. Why? Because no mani' was removed. This person already had wudu. So the mani' had been removed. The mani' had been removed when he did his wudu the first time, before dhuhr. Now, when he wants to pray asr, he already has wudu. He's just doing another wudu as an act of sunnah. It's called wudu tajaddud. So after wudu tajaddud, the water that is used for wudu tajaddud and it gets collected in a bucket or in the sink, this water can be used again. Why? Because no mani' was removed through this. Similarly, in the case of ghusl that one takes on the day of Jum'ah, it's something that is sunnah. It is something that is sunnah. So someone goes and he takes that ghusl, provided that he wasn't in a state of janaba, because if he was in a state of janaba, he will be taking ghusl janaba, not the sunnah ghusl for Jumu'ah. But this person is not in a state of janaba, he's just taking the sunnah ghusl. And the water that he used, it gets collected in a bucket. Can he use it again? Yes, it can be used again. Because this wudu was not used to remove a mani'. This wudu was not used to remove a mani'. Now, so you see how from one condition that you study in the madhab, there are so many rulings that you can deduce from that. There are so many rulings that you can deduce from that. The second condition that the Shafi'iyya stipulate for water to be considered used water, that al-ma'ul musta'mal, is that this water should have been qaleel. And when the Shafi'i say qaleel, they mean less than. It linguistically means less, but qaleel in the terminology of the fuqaha means, al-ma'ul qaleel in the terminology of the fuqaha means water that is less than qullatayn, so less than 160 liters. What this means is that if someone jumped into a river with the intention of doing wudu, or with the intention of ghuslul janaba, the water of the river will not become used water. That water can be used many times by as many people. How many people ever want to use it, they can use it many times. Why? Because this water of the river is going to be more than qullatayn. It's going to be more than qullatayn. So only when the water is less than qullatayn will it be considered used water, with the previous condition mentioned that it was used to remove a mani'. But if someone uses water that is qullatayn or more than qullatayn with the intention to remove a mani', this water will, because it's qullatayn or more than qullatayn, it will still be considered completely pure water that can be used many times by as many people as possible. Right? There's no limitation. The dalil for that is the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إذا بلغ الماء قلتين. Then the hadith shows that if once water reaches qullatayn, it cannot be made impure. And then there's a certain condition to that. There are other ahadith and other nusus that are used to do takhsis of this, to make it a bit more specific, and we'll discuss that when we come to water that is najis. But in this case, if water is qullatayn or more than qullatayn, and someone uses it for wudu or ghusl janaba to remove a mani', that water is still considered usable and reusable. It will not be called ma'ul musta'mal. It will not be called used water. Na'am. The third condition that the Shafi'iyya place is that أن ينفصل من العضو, that used water is the water after it has been put on the body part, it trickles down from it. It separates from the body part. And there are two scenarios for this. The first scenario is if, for example, someone washed, they did masa on their head, they did mash on their head in wudu, and water trickled down from the head and dropped on to their feet. Did this water purify this person's feet? No. Why? Because this was used water. It was already used on the head, and it trickled down and it washed his feet, but his feet are not considered purified. He has to use other water to purify it. Why? Because the water that fell from his head, this was already used. And the second case is if the water, it falls down from your body part and it gets collected in a bucket. This is also considered used water, if it was used to remove a mani', as we have gone through. And the final condition that the Shafi'iyya mentioned for water to be considered used water is أَلَّا يَنْوِي الْإِغْتِرَافِ, that the person should not have intended اغتراف. What do they mean by that? There are two scenarios for this. Firstly, to define things, اغتراف means using your hands as a tool to make water reach your other parts. So when you're doing wudu, by using your hands, when you put them in, you're intending first of all that you're going to use these hands to splash water onto your face, to wash your face, or you're going to use these hands to rub on your head or your feet. So you're using your hands as a tool. You're intending that. The other scenario is you put your hands in the water while intending to wash your hands directly, not to use them as a tool to make water reach the other parts of your body, but to wash your hands directly, to remove the hadath from your hands. This is what is called, the person does not intend ightiraf. When you put your hands directly in a bucket without intending to use them as a tool to wash your other parts, and you intend that you're trying to remove hadath from your hands directly, this is called that this person did not intend ightiraf. Because ightiraf is the action of intending to use your waters as a tool to help to use your hands as a tool to help water reach the other parts of your body. Ightiraf is to intend that you use your hands as a tool to make water reach the other parts of your body. So there are two possible scenarios for this in the Shafi'i madhab. The first scenario is the scenario of someone who is junub, someone who is in a state of janaba, someone who is in the state of janaba. Now this person, his complete body is in a state of hadath, including his hands. And because in ghusl there is no tartib, there is no specific order that you have to follow. In wudu you have to follow a specific order. You wash your face first and so on and so forth, right? In ghusl, you're not following a proper tartib. You just put water on you. So if there's a bucket of water, back then they did not have showers. They would use water in buckets. And even now in many places they don't have showers. They use buckets. So there's water in this bucket. And this person, he's in a state of janaba. And he says Bismillah. Now, while putting his hands inside the bucket, he does not intend that he's going to use his hands to wash the rest of his body parts. Rather, what he intends is that he's washing his hands and he's removing hadath from his hands. If he does that, the whole water has become used water. All the water in the bucket is now considered al-ma'ul musta'mal, which cannot be used for other parts of his body, because he intended to remove hadath from the hands. He did not intend to use his hands as a tool to make water reach the other parts of his body or to wash the other parts of his body. He put his hands directly inside the water with the intention that he's going to remove the hadath from his hands. So now this whole water is now considered It's considered مستعمل. غير مطهر. It cannot be used to purify his other body parts, because the mani', the hadath, has been removed from his hands, and this whole bucket was used because he put his hands in it. He put his hands in the whole bucket. The whole water has now become ma'ul musta'mal. So this is the first scenario. On the other hand, if he had intended that he was going to put his hands inside the bucket with the intention that he was going to use it as a tool to wash the other parts of his body, then the whole water would not have become ma'ul musta'mal. He could have used it to purify his whole body. So this is the first scenario in the case of someone who is in the state of janaba. What about someone who is not in a state of janaba and he just wants to do wudu and he has a bucket in front of him? In wudu, tartib is wajib. And washing your hands first before you wash your face, that is sunnah. That's not a wajib act. That doesn't remove the mani'. So if someone, he wants to do wudu, he says Bismillah, and he washes his hands first, and he puts his hands inside the bucket with the intention of that he's going to wash his hands first as the sunnah action, then this water is not considered ma'ul musta'mal, because he was doing an action from the sunnah which did not remove the mani'. It did not remove the mani', because the mani' is removed when you perform the wajib acts of wudu. Na'am. Such as if someone, he had a bucket in front of him, the first wajib act of wudu is washing the face, based on the ayah of the Quran, فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. Right? So if he had a bucket in front of him and he put his face first inside the water with the intention of removing hadath, and he wants to do wudu, this whole water has become used water now. This whole water has become used water now, because it was used to remove the hadath that was there on his face. So uzila bihil hadath. So now it has become used water. And in the case of hands, because it is in the tartib of wudu, it is wajib to wash your hands in wudu after the face. So imagine he was done with his face. He was done washing his face. He comes to do wudu. He says Bismillah. He washes his hands first as the action of sunnah. Then he washes his face, which is the first wajib act of wudu. And then he directly puts his hands inside the bucket to remove the hadath from them. This whole bucket is going to be considered used water now. If he had wanted to use all of this water for the rest of his body parts as well to do wudu, he should have intended that he was going to use his hands as a tool to scoop out the water first, and then he should have rubbed the water on his hands. That way the water would have remained pure for the rest of his body parts as well. So these are the two situations that the Shafi'i fuqaha mention in the case of ikhtiraf. And because this is a second level book, this detail is being given. Otherwise, in the level 1 book, the Shafi'i fuqaha tend to not mention this condition. Why? Because it can be confusing for someone who's an absolute beginner. Now, so this was al-ma'ul musta'mal, the first type of water, which is Tahir Ghair Mutahhir. It's pure in itself, but it cannot be used to purify you. Now, what is our dalil? So these are the 4 conditions that we went through, but what is the dalil of the Shafi'iyya that this type of water which has been used in this way to remove a mani' from yourself, it cannot be used again to do wudu? The dalil that the Shafi'iyya give is that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were travelers. They traveled a lot, and they had very limited resources and very little water to drink, and very little water to do wudu. Yet, despite the fact that they traveled a lot and they had very little water, they never collected the water that was left over from their wudu or their ghusl. They never collected it. So that is the evidence that the Shafi'iyya use to mention that this type of water, ma'ul musta'mal, water that has been used in wudu, in a wajib act of purification. Some of the fuqaha, they say, instead of using the term أُزِيلَ بِهِ الْمَانِعِ, they say استعمل في طهارة واجبة. Water that was used in a wajib act of purification, like wudu or ghusl. This water, if it's used once, it cannot be used a second time. That's the evidence. Well, someone might ask at this point, then why are you saying this water is pure in itself? It cannot be used to purify others. Why are you saying it is pure in itself? What is your evidence for that? Well, we point to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which Jabir radiallahu anh mentioned that he was ill. The Prophet ﷺ did wudu, and the water that was remaining on the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ rubbed it on Jabir radiallahu anh. So if this water was not pure, the used water, the Prophet ﷺ would not have rubbed it on Jabir radiallahu anh. So that shows that the water is pure in itself once it's used for a wajib act of purification, but it cannot be used a second time. Now, so far we have mentioned that the second type of water is water that is Tahir, Ghair, Mutahhir. It is water that is pure in itself, but it cannot be used for the purification of others. It cannot be used for acts of purification like wudu and ghusl. And the first type of this water is what we call al-ma'ul musta'mal, used water, with its conditions that we mentioned. The second type of water, the second category of this type, Tahir Ghair Mutahhir, is water al-mutaghayyir bima khalatahu min al-tahirat. Water that was changed by the addition of a pure substance. Now, because it was changed by the addition of a pure substance, we can't consider it impure, because the substance that was added was pure, and this water was pure as well, and the substance that was added to it was pure. So this water is pure in itself, but it cannot be used for purification under certain conditions. The first condition is that the substance that was the pure substance that was added to this water was added so much that now this thing is not called water anymore. This thing is not called water anymore. So imagine you have a cup in which you put some water and then you put a tea bag in it. The tea bag will dominate the color of the water, and this will not be water anymore. This will now become tea. It will now become tea. So the fuqaha, they say that this type of water, so much of the pure substance was added to it that بحيث تسلب اسم الماء عنه, that it takes away the name of water from this. So it's not called water anymore, it's called tea now. لا يقع عليه اسم الماء. It's not called water anymore. It is now called something else. Similarly, if you have a glass of water and you put a lot of lemons in it and some sugar, it's now lemonade. It's not water anymore. So tea and lemonade, they cannot be used to make wudu, because even though they're pure and they can be used, you can use them for drinking. But now this has become something else, because so much of it was added, so much of the pure substance was added to it. Similarly, if you add soap or surf to a bucket of water, now this is not regular water anymore, right? It's soap water, and you can use it to wash your clothes, but you can't use it for wudu or ghusl. Now the second condition, so this is the first condition, that the change happened so much that it's not regular water anymore. The second condition is that the substance added should have been a pure substance. So that means that if an impure substance was added to it, this water would not be pure anymore. It would not be, and it would go into the category of Ma'un Najis, which is the third type of water, which we will get to in a moment, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Now, the third condition that the Shafi'iyya mentioned is that the taghayyur, the change, needs to happen bimukhalit. The substance that was added to this water, it needs to be such a substance that mixes with it and becomes a part of it. and it can and becomes a substance that cannot be removed. It's a substance that cannot be removed, right? And so the Shafi'iyya, they mention another thing. They say this substance that was added to water, it needs to be a mukhalit. It mixes with it and becomes a part of it. However, if there's a substance which is added to water, and you can see the difference between it and the water, and you can remove it from the water, then the water is fine, you can use it. For example, if a few leaves fall on water, you can remove those leaves and you can use that water. Now these leaves, they are pure substances, and they did not mix with the water. They can be removed, and they can be, and so this water can now be used for purification. It is Tahoor. However, if a certain substance is added which becomes a part of the water, it's pure, the substance is pure, but it becomes part of the water, and it mixes with it, then this water cannot be used anymore for wudu or ghusl. There's a question that we have to ask today because of the advancement of modern science, that now there are a lot of things which become mixed with water, but now we have processes like distillation and crystallization, due to which you can remove many things from water that have been added to it. So will the Shafi'iyya consider this water which in which some substance was added and became a part of it and mixed with it, but then a process like distillation or crystallization was used to remove it from the water, will the Shafi'iyya consider this water to be usable for wudu or ghusl? This is a question that needs to be put forward to the Shafi'i fuqaha. Na'am. Because, and the reason why it needs to be put forward, and the reason why the answer is not so clear, is because the Shafi'i fuqaha consider the thing that can be removed, they call it أن يتميز برأي العين. The thing which can be removed from water, with your eyes you can see that it's a separate entity from the water. You can see that it's a separate entity from the water. So they add that condition. So if there's a leaf on the water, you can see that the leaf is separate, the water is separate, and you can just remove the leaf. On the other hand, if you add ink to the water, or tea leaves to the water, they will become a part of the water, and now you can't tell the difference, and so on and so forth. So this is the third condition that they stipulate. The fourth condition that they stipulate is يمكن صون الماء عنه. So they say that if you have water and something grows on top of water, they call it tuhlub. It's a green substance that grows on water. The Shafi'iyya say that this is water that you can use. You can use it for wudu or ghusl. Why? Because there was no way you could have stopped this green substance from growing on top of it. On the other hand, if you have water and you know there's a fruit tree next to it, and you put a bucket of water under it, and you knew that the fruit would fall into the water, and the taste of the fruit, or the color of the fruit would change the water. You could have protected this water from this falling of the fruit and from the water being changed, but you didn't do it. So that's why you can't use this water that has now been changed because of the fruits that have fallen into it. This is what they call يمكن صون الماء عنه. Because in the case of tuhlub, this green substance going over water, it's not your fault. You could have done nothing to stop this. So you have an excuse to use this water. But in other cases where you can protect the water from being changed, from pure substances being added to it, you could have protected the water from it, but you didn't. And this pure substance fell into the water and the water changed. Now you can't use that water anymore. So these are the four conditions that the Shafi'iyya mention for a water to be considered mutaghayyir bima khalatahu min at-tahirat, for water to be considered changed by the addition of pure substances. And this water is pure in itself, but it cannot be used for ghusl or wudu, or wudu. Why? Because now it's not regular water anymore, and in the Sharia you can only make wudu with water, and you can only do tayammum with turab. Now, so those are the first two types of water that is Tahoor or Tahir Mutahhir or al-ma' al-mutlaq. That's the first type of water. And then the second type of water is Tahir Ghair Mutahhir, water that is pure in itself but cannot be used for purification. It cannot be used for purification. The third type of water and the final type is al-ma' al-najis, impure water. Impure water. And this water is of two types. The first type is water that was qalil, al-ma'ul qalil, meaning it's less than qullatayn, less than 160 liters. Someone urinated in it. Now, even though the urine might not have changed its color, smell, or taste, just by the fact that urine entered it, this water is considered impure. Why? Because it's less than قلتين. What's the evidence for that? It's the hadith إذا بلغ الماء قلتين لم يحمل الخبث. If water, the meaning of the hadith, the mafhum is that if water reaches قلتين, then it will not carry any impurity. So the mafhum al-mukhalafa from it, the meaning understood from the opposite, is that if water has not reached qullatayn, then it will carry impurities. And this is something that you will study in usul al-fiqh, mafhum al-mukhalafa. So this is the hadith that the Shafi'iyya use to substantiate this ruling, that if water is less than 160 liters, it's less than qullatayn, just by the fact that an impure substance, a najis substance was added to it, whether it changed it or not, this water is going to be considered impure. Or the second type is, what if the water is qullatayn or more, 160 liters or more? What then? Will the addition of a pure substance render it impure? The Shafi'iyya say yes, if one of its characteristics change, its taste or its smell or its color. If one of these characteristics change, then this water will be considered impure. Otherwise, it will not. Why? Because it's qullatayn, and the evidence is the hadith that if water reaches qullatayn, it does not carry impurities. Now, this water in which this impure substance, let's say urine, was added to the point that it changed the color of the water, can this water be made pure in some way? The Shafi'iyya say yes, if you add more water to it till the color is removed. You add so much water to this that now the water returns back to its normal color, you can use this water now. Or they'll say, if you add a substance to it which can purify it, but the condition is that this substance should actually purify the water and not just hide the characteristic. An example of that, let's say the water, there's 160 liters of water, someone added a lot of urine to it, and its smell changed. Now someone comes and he puts perfume in it. The Shafi'iyya say that this water, you cannot use it. Why? Because perfume will only, the smell of the perfume will overcome the smell of the urine, but the urine is still in there. It's still a part of it. It's still a part of the water. It hasn't been removed. So the water has not been purified. But if you could add a substance that could purify the water from the urine, then yes, you can use that water again. Or if you add so much water to this impure water that the color or the smell or the taste changes back to normal, then this water can be used again. So this is the third type of water, al-ma'un najis, and it is of two types. That is, number one, if water is less than qullatayn, less than 160 liters, just by the addition of an impure substance, whether it changes it or not, this water will be considered impure. And the second type is water that is qullatain or more. It is 160 liters or more. This water will be considered impure if an impure substance enters it and changes one of its characteristics. Now, and with this, we have completed this chapter, the chapter on types of water and the categories of water. To summarize very briefly, overall we have three types of water. Water that is Tahoor, Tahir, Mutahhir, al-Ma'u al-Mutlaq, water that is pure in itself and it can purify others. It can be used for wudu or ghusl. And the 7 types of water, Ma'u al-Bahar, Ma'u al-Sama', Ma'u al-Nahar, and so on and so forth, they are from this category. The second type of water is Tahir, Ghair Mutahhir, water that is pure, but it is pure in itself, but it cannot purify you. It cannot be used for wudu or ghusl. And number 3, you have water that is Najis. It is impure. It is impure in itself and it cannot be used for any action. It cannot be used for ibadah. It cannot be used for aada as well. This water cannot be used for cooking or cleaning or anything as well because it's impure. Now, and with that, we will end this second lesson. Barakallah feekum for attending. Barakallah feekum for listening. Assalamu alaikum.